training camp's open across the entire National Football League. And Saquon Barkley apparently going to be there on time because the Giants flipped him a little bit of face-saving dollars in the form of an incentive that he's got to have a career year to hit. Pro Football Talk's Mike Florio back here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Mike?
Rich, doing great, buddy. How are you?
So this was done out of the goodness of the Giants' heart? Is that what this – walk me through your reporting on this one-year deal for Saquon that's, I guess, 1 year for 10 point I guess it's franchise tag plus, right? Like, since everything's a plus these days, franchise tag plus.
My understanding, Rich, was that on the Saturday night Zoom call with the top running backs, and you had Dalvin Cook on yesterday talking about what went down, the sense that was emanating during that conversation was that Saquon Barkley had resigned himself to the fact that he just needed to show up. The system is bad. Some point in time, you got to make a good decision based on a bad system in a bad situation. Now, Josh Jacobs, not inclined to show up anytime soon. Barkley, folks got the impression, was going to come in. And so anything he gets above the $10.1 million is a bonus if he was going to take the $10.1 million. I would have liked to think he could have gotten more than a $900,000 incentive package that requires 1,350 rushing yards, 65 catches, 11 touchdowns, and a playoff appearance to hit all four triggers and get the full money, or at least get, if I do all those things, I promise you won't tag me next year, but at least it's something over and above the 10.1 that he was due to make. And he's the first one in my recollection that was franchise tagged that actually got more money on that long-term deal after the on that one-year deal, after the deadline for a long-term deal passed. A couple of guys in the past, Lance Briggs and Albert Haynesworth, got a promise that if they hit certain triggers, they wouldn't be tagged the next year. Barkley's the first one to potentially get more money, but he's going to have to do a lot to get more money.
So what did happen? Why didn't the Giants and Saquon, best to your knowledge, get together for a long-term deal? What was the holdup?
What happened was back in the early part of the offseason when the Giants had one franchise tag to use and two players on whom they were inclined to consider using it, Saquon Barkley and quarterback Daniel Jones. They tried to get Barkley signed to a long-term deal, and then they would have tagged Jones. When Barkley rejected the pre-tag offer, they pivoted to Jones and got a deal done with him and then tagged Saquon Barkley. Now, ideally, and I'm going to digress here for a second, but it just demonstrates one of the strategies that could be employed by running backs and other players in a situation like this. If they could get their agents to work together, what Jones and Barkley should have done was locked arms, Red Rover style, and said, we're not taking any long-term deal, neither of us. You're going to tag one of us, and the other one's hitting the market. But they didn't do that, and the Giants played one over the other, tried to sign Barkley and tag Jones, didn't work, tagged Barkley, signed Jones, and then pulled the offer that they had on the table for Barkley before they tagged him. And then I think a lot of the weeks and months after that were spent trying to get the Giants to put the offer back on the table that they had yanked before they tagged him.
And then what happened at the, midnight hour, the 12:01 on the day of the deadline from a couple Mondays ago?
Couldn't get it done. Bottom line, once the Giants pulled that offer that was on the table pre-tag, and my understanding is they made it clear, here's what's going to happen, here's what we're going to do. We don't want to have to tag you. We want to sign you to a long-term deal, and we want to tag Daniel Jones. When he forced them to go forward with the tag, that threw everything off kilter. There was an offer made during the offseason program that I believe was less than what was made pre-tag, and there was just this effort, I believe, based on everything I've heard, by Barkley and his representatives, and he had CAA involved kind of late in the process, and the CAA agent who was working with the Rock Nation agent wanted to reshuffle the deck and start over, and the Giants were like, no, we already have a negotiation that's been going on here. We're not going to go back to square one just because there's a new agent involved. So it was a lot of factors and moving parts, and they just couldn't get the deal done. And, what I had heard was the Giants were ready to pay $13 million a year and $26 million fully guaranteed over the first 2 years back pre-tag, and that's not an unreasonable offer. That's fair for what Barkley's done. I heard he wanted $16 a year. That's not unreasonable either. And I'd like to think that that's enough of a gap. It's small enough that they could have worked something out. So ultimately, end of the day, they didn't get it done, and now the Giants have Barkley under contract for a year, and they still have the ability to tag him next year if they want to keep him around at a 20% raise over whatever he ends up making this year.
The thing I just don't understand, Mike, is just the fact that, okay, so they're saving $9 million over the span of 3 years, and they get to hold the line on the franchise tag and also hold the line for running backs for the rest of the 31 teams in the NFL, and that is more important than paying your guy what he wants. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I understand that things are done in the NFL because they can be done, but if it really is just down to he wanted 16, they wanted to pay him 13, and they wouldn't meet at 14 and a half, and so they'll stick him with 10 and incentives to get up to 11. That's $3 million more bucks in the pocket for what? A linebacker that they might need? You know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to wrap my arms around it, Mike. I just can't. Well, it's tough.
And the only way to wrap your arms around it is to accept the fact that football is very heavily driven by analytics, and this entire depression of the market for running backs. I asked somebody last week, what's gone on here? Why are we at this juncture in the existence of the NFL? And the response was blame analytics and blame Mike Shanahan. Because you go back to 1999, Terrell Davis tears an ACL, Orlando Scary comes in, has 1,100-plus yards over the balance of 1999. The next year, Mike Anderson has over 1,400 yards. That system where you plug anyone in and you can gain a lot of yards. Sean Payton started using a full complement of running backs. When they used the second overall pick on Reggie Bush, he didn't supplant Deuce McAllister. They split the touches, and then Pierre Thomas got sprinkled in once he arrived on the scene and showed he could get it done. And he was a guy who was either drafted very low or not at all. So that's the fundamental problem, and I think the teams are adhering to their very cold, objective, dispassionate assessment of what running backs can do, what other cheaper, younger running backs will do. And, you know, we've heard for years the NFL is what have you done for me lately. I think especially with running backs, but also the rest of the league, but particularly with running backs, it's not what have you done for me lately. It's what are you doing for me right now, and what do I think you're going to do for me tomorrow? And that's why the running backs are getting screwed here, and that's why the Giants weren't willing to say, well, this guy's put in 5 solid years. He's played through injury. He came back and had a great season. They have the rights under the franchise tag to squat on him at 10-1. And they did it, and they weren't willing to trade that in because they'll pay him 10-1 this year, and if they choose to tag him next year, they'll pay a 20% raise, and by that point, they're probably ready to move on to somebody else.
The crazy thing is, Mike, is that for whoever told you, blame Mike Shanahan, the individual running the more modern version of that offense right now, his son Kyle, employs the running back that makes the most. So they're
that's right. That's right.
They're
and
the
Shanahan's had a different leading rusher every year. In each of the 7 years he's been the head coach of the 49ers. But they recognize there's something different about Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey's got the rushing and the receiving. He's an offensive weapon. That's how he got his contract after 3 years with the Panthers. They knew what they were getting themselves into when they drafted him, and he paid off. They knew they were going to have to pay him after 3 years. And, Rich, that is the key. There are big-picture solutions or maybe no big-picture solutions at all for running backs, but there's the individual player-by-player solution. And if you're a great player and you have a great third season, because that's when the window opens on negotiations for a long-term deal, you get that deal after 3 years, and you do whatever you have to do to get that deal. You hold out if you have to hold out. You agitate behind the scenes as much as you can. You get that deal after 3 years. Otherwise, you're in the Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, DeMarco Murray. Go back to 2014. DeMarco Murray set the Cowboys franchise single-season rushing record, and they just said, thank you, see you later, and they signed Darren McFadden for a hell of a lot less, and he had a bigger year than Murray had in 2015.
So that's why I said, and then we'll turn to other stories as training camps are all 32 teams open, that Derrick Henry is the one that can kind of change a little bit of a dynamic here. And he's going to turn 30 in January, and if he has a Derrick Henry-like year for a Titans team that few people thought could win the division, and he helps take them to a playoff game, then I understand he's still a unicorn in a way, but he can sort of prove 30 is just a number, and the numbers that really matter are the ones that he's putting up, and see who wants him if the Titans decide to put him out to pasture just because he's 30. I'm just wondering.
And Rich, you've caused me to think of something here. I have an idea.
Let's do it. What do you got?
And I don't know if the Titans have reported yet. It's impossible to keep up with what's going on. You go from that slow period where you have to actually go looking for news to it's falling out of the trees, and you have to wade through it. But if the Titans haven't reported yet, would this be an opportunity for Derrick Henry to hold out and say, look, you need me this year. You're going through transition at quarterback. You're breaking in DeAndre Hopkins, and you're paying DeAndre Hopkins more on a base salary than I'm going to make this year, and I'm the guy that's been the straw that has stirred this drink the last 5 years. This may be the time for him to draw a line in the sand, even though usually, like I said, you do it after your third year. When you're getting toward the end of your second contract, maybe now is the time to do it to get some more security. Remember, there was that talk earlier in the offseason about a possible trade. I think that possibility of the Henry trade flowed from, I want a new contract. Okay, we'll see if anybody wants to trade for you, just to demonstrate to him, like the Chargers demonstrated to Austin Eckler, no one's going to pay you what you're looking for and give us what we would want, so we just better make this work this year. I would not be shocked. I mean, nothing shocks me in the NFL anymore, but what if he just wouldn't show up? That would definitely change the dynamic for the Titans as the season approaches.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk here on the Rich Eisen Show. 49ers quarterback competition. What's your sense of it now that this is finally going to get underway after months of us talking about it? What do you have for me there?
I think as long as Brock Purdy's healthy, he's going to be the guy week one. But I also believe if there's any hitch in Purdy's recovery from that shoulder surgery, it's Sam Darnold. They've been working hard to get people to understand that even though Trey Lance was the third overall pick and they ultimately invested 3 first-round picks and a third-round pick to get him, Darnold is the guy above Lance on the depth chart, and Lance is the guy they're just keeping around as the emergency option because last year they had to use their emergency option. So I think that's how it goes. Purdy if healthy, then Darnold, then Lance, and they keep all three because they may have to use all three.
So Lance would be third on the depth chart, huh? Wow. That's crazy. And I guess that would be the, in case of emergency quarterback for anybody that has a, heaven forbid, a Teddy Bridgewater type injury over the next 2-3 weeks, right? I mean, I just don't see how, because everyone thinks that Lance has got a huge upside. All he's got to do is get reps and some time. And third on the depth chart, that would be wild, man. I don't know.
Well, and you raise an interesting point. If somebody does have that freak quarterback injury, and look, quarterback injuries typically don't happen in training camp and preseason because they don't get touched in training camp. And in the preseason, they rarely actually play. The starters rarely play anymore. And people think that Teddy Bridgewater's knee injury happened in the preseason game against the Chargers just a few days earlier, and then it just gave out during that practice. But if you would have that happen and somebody shows up offering a 1 and a 4 like the Vikings offered to get Sam Bradford 7 years ago, then that's when the 49ers would get somebody else ready to be their third quarterback. But until they get that kind of an offer, they're going to keep him around because, look, they had to use their third quarterback last year, and their third quarterback ended up playing well. And maybe those are the circumstances where Lance would finally play well. Kid's under a ton of pressure, everything they gave up to get him, all the expectations, the whole Jimmy Garoppolo back and forth, and are they going to use him as a rookie? They didn't use him much as a rookie. He plays last year. He breaks his ankle. Maybe the best way for him to finally prove himself is if he just gets thrust into service because the two guys in front of him get injured. And the way it's gone for the 49ers, I don't know what they did to piss off the football guards, but they just can't keep their quarterbacks healthy.
So, we, as you mentioned, Mike, I had Dalvin Cook on yesterday. What do you think his market is? And I imagine he'll be the first to sign. There's Zeke, Fournette, Kareem Hunt. There's a ton of guys with a lot of production history that are just sitting around waiting to find out where the pieces land for running backs.
I thought it was funny that he was so candid with you about why he's not in Minnesota, but when the time came to talk about what he wants to do next, he was very evasive, very vague, very non-committal. He's waiting. And, hey, Rich, we talked about quarterbacks don't get injured very often in training camp in the preseason. Guess who does? Running backs. Yeah. So the dynamic could change dramatically. And I've been doing this for 25 years now. This is the time of year where you just kind of wait every single day. Where's that lightning bolt going to come from where a guy tears an ACL? Yesterday, C.J. Gardner-Johnson. And before that, Naheem Hines gets hit by a jet ski for crying out loud. You never know when a guy's going to get injured that may create an opportunity for Dalvin Cook that wasn't already there, that maybe creates money for him and he goes to that team, or it puts more pressure on one of the teams talking to him and they increase their offer. So I think that he realizes time is on his side to a certain extent. At some point you got to get ready for the season, but early in camp, you stay home, you watch and you wait, and you see whether or not an opportunity pops up. And, hey, I've been saying this for months now. Would the Raiders at some point rescind the franchise tender from Josh Jacobs and just pay Dalvin Cook $6-7 million? I don't know that is a dramatic difference, and it may be dollar for dollar a much better deal for the Raiders than Jacobs upset and disgruntled showing up to play this year and taking his 10-1.
That would be something else, man. But it is, I mean, that is in the realm of possibility. I mean, other than just having to teach somebody the terminology or the way of the McDaniels, right? That might be an apples to apples, since that's what we're always talking about with this league at the running back spot right now. Apples to apples.
Yeah, you plug them in, you trust them in pass protection if you can, and you let them go do their thing. But between the tackles runner is what he's been, and he can help you out in space, and he could be a potent weapon. It's amazing to me because when he was explaining to you yesterday, he just wants to play for a team where he can help them win games. 4 of the Vikings' wins last year directly flowed from plays he made. That's what's astounding to me, that the Vikings are pivoting so dramatically away from the run game that they don't value a player like that. But I still think that it was a mistake for them to let him go. But again, if you're going to throw the ball all over the place and you need money for Justin Jefferson and you're trying to figure out your quarterback situation long term, that $10 million on Dalvin Cook is maybe a luxury you can't afford.
Last one for you, Mike, and this may not be fair because I'm thinking of it watching Mike McCarthy talk right now as the Cowboys are opening up their training camp up the road from us here in Southern California. Who's coaching for their gigs this year, do you think? Hot seat talk here at the end of July. What do you got for me on that front? And you feel free to push back to say McCarthy's not, that Jerry is just a guy who's not going to change horses there regardless. What do you got for me?
You never know what Jerry's going to do because he completely, totally, and unequivocally supports his coach until the moment he no longer does. This year there's no excuses for McCarthy. He's running the offense, so it had better work. And 12-5 is great, but when you make fairly quick exits from the postseason, you haven't been back to the NFC Championship game since 1995, that puts more pressure on everyone. So I think he does need to have at least a playoff year to be safe. If they fail to make the playoffs this year, I think he could be in real trouble. Brandon Staley, the Chargers, has to be, at this point, with Justin Herbert and the way that they ended the 2022 season with that epic collapse against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Staley has to be under pressure this year. New offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, fired by the Cowboys, lands with the Chargers, has to get more out of Justin Herbert, one of the great quarterbacks in the NFL. And, I know my buddy Tom Curran was on with you last week talking about Bill Belichick. I think Robert Kraft put everyone on notice, including Bill Belichick, and starting with him, that they need to do something this year or it could be over. When he was asked at the league meetings in Arizona, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the question was along the lines of, does Bill Belichick stay until he passes Don Shula on the all-time wins list, or does he need to get to the playoffs this year? And Kraft didn't say, oh, he's here as long as he wants, or, oh, hey, we're supporting Belichick no matter what, and he's got 6 Super Bowl wins, and are you crazy? No, he gave an answer that when you look at it, it's like he could be in trouble if they don't turn this thing around. And I think what happened last year with the offense with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, that leaves a mark on Bill Belichick's permanent record, and Robert Kraft is very well aware of it. And I think what happens this year, depending upon how bad it gets, and on paper they're the worst team in the division, if they miss the playoffs and they have a rough year, there could be a change in New England come 2024.
That would be something else. I still would have to see that to believe it. Again, I totally get the Joe Judge and Patricia thing last year and how it might have cost a year of Mac Jones's development based on the viewpoint of ownership sitting in the suite at the 50-yard line. That I can understand that, but man, that is and I know they love Gerard, Gerard Mayo, but that's a long cliff. That next step's a Lulu if you let Belichick go. I mean, I'm serious.
There's some people out there that throw out the possibility of the Patriots trying to bring Mike Vrabel home post-Belichick, which would be fascinating if they would try to make that move. And they wouldn't fire Belichick. It would be a mutual parting, and everyone is hand in hand, and all these great. They wouldn't just throw him out the door, and he wouldn't put his resignation on a cocktail napkin. It would be something that looks mutual. But still, if it would happen, you're right. And Rich, every owner that's thinking about firing a coach has to ask that question. The easy part is getting rid of the guy I have. The hard part is finding a guy who's as good or better.
Mike Florio, always appreciate it. Thanks for being so giving of your time, as always, here on the show. Let me know whatever I can do to reciprocate at any point during this upcoming football season, and look for more of my texts and calls throughout the training camp season. Greatly appreciate it.
Always happy to be with you, Rich.
Thanks very much. That is Mike Florio, PFT Live on Peacock, which you can see right here on Roku. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.